James Rutherford was the kind of man who seemed to have it all. In his mid-30s, tall, impeccably dressed, and carrying the kind of charm that made heads turn wherever he went, he was the epitome of success. A self-made millionaire, James had built his empire from the ground up, investing in tech startups, luxury real estate, and high-end boutiques. His friends envied him, strangers admired him, and everyone who met him assumed his life was flawless. The truth, however, was that James carried a careful mask. Behind his confident smile and polished demeanor, there were secrets he kept even from those closest to him. Yet, from the outside, everything about him radiated control, power, and charm, as though nothing could ever touch his carefully curated life. By his side was Emily, his wife of 3 years, whose glow was now amplified by the gentle roundness of her pregnancy. Emily was devoted, her love unwavering, her trust absolute. She had met James at a charity gala, captivated not just by his success but by the warmth behind his eyes, the rare glimpses of sincerity that seemed to soften his otherwise commanding presence. Now, expecting their first child, she was filled with hope, dreaming of a family filled with laughter, security, and happiness. Her days were spent planning nurseries, attending prenatal appointments, and imagining a future in which their love was the center of everything. She believed in James completely, not just as a husband but as a partner who would share in every joy, every challenge, and every milestone of their growing family. Together, they lived a life that many could only dream of. Their penthouse apartment overlooked the city skyline, a glass and marble palace furnished with the finest decor money could buy. Luxury cars waited at the curb, while their social calendar overflowed with galas, private dinners, and high-profile events. The world saw a perfect couple, the devoted husband, the graceful wife, and the life of opulence and privilege that wrapped them in an aura of untouchable perfection. Yet beneath the gleaming surface, there were subtle cracks. James often lingered on his phone, hushed conversations that ended the moment Emily entered the room. A lingering gaze toward his assistant, or a quick, nervous laugh at a private message. Emily noticed these fleeting moments but dismissed them, attributing them to stress, work pressures, and the demands of wealth. Still, there was a quiet tension in the air, a whisper of unease that hinted that perfection was perhaps more fragile than it appeared, a prelude to storms yet to come. Emily woke early that morning, the sunlight spilling softly across their luxurious bedroom, glinting off the crystal chandelier above. Today, she had decided, she would surprise James. With her pregnancy swelling gently, she had prepared something special, his favorite homemade lunch, a small, hand-picked bouquet of flowers, and a carefully written note meant to remind him how much she loved him. Her excitement bubbled as she arranged everything neatly in a basket, tying a delicate ribbon around it. The idea of seeing his face light up with joy filled her with warmth, and she could barely wait to watch his stress melt away, even for a brief moment, in the comfort of her little surprise. As she drove toward James's office, a sleek tower in the heart of the city, her mind wandered to the plans for their future. She imagined the nursery, soft pastel walls, a tiny crib, and the first time she would hold their child in her arms. Her smile widened as she parked the car, clutching the basket to her chest, envisioning the perfect scene that awaited her. There was something almost cinematic about this moment, the gentle hum of the city, the sunlight bouncing off skyscrapers, the anticipation of sharing a simple yet meaningful gesture with the man she loved most. Emily walked into the building, greeted the receptionist with her usual charm, and asked to see James. She could hear the faint sound of his voice through the open glass door of his office, soft laughter mingling with a low, serious tone. As she approached, her heart fluttered with excitement, ready to step into a scene of normalcy and affection. But as she rounded the corner, she noticed small, peculiar details that prickled her intuition. James's phone, always neatly put away, was clutched tightly in his hand, the screen angled just out of view. His laughter sounded different somehow, almost nervous, not the warm, genuine tone she remembered. Emily paused for a moment, frowning slightly, feeling an unexplainable tension in the air. She noticed a shadow of movement across the office floor, a figure hastily retreating behind the closed door of his private study. The name tag on the office door read, James Rutherford, CEO, yet behind it, something felt wrong. A fleeting glimpse of a woman's silhouette, perfectly poised, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, made Emily's stomach twist. Her mind raced, trying to convince herself it was nothing, just a colleague perhaps, a client even, but a whisper of unease crawled along her spine. Her excitement began to mingle with a faint, nagging anxiety. The office, usually familiar and safe, suddenly felt like a stage set for something she was not meant to witness. Heart beating faster, Emily moved closer, gripping the basket tightly as if it could protect her from whatever lay ahead. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself she was overthinking, but deep down, she knew instinctively that today would not unfold as she had imagined. A sense of dread mingled with curiosity, and with every careful step toward James's office, Emily's anticipation of a happy surprise began to twist into the first tremors of shock and heartbreak that she could never have prepared for. Emily's steps faltered as she slowly pushed open the office door, the gentle click of the handle echoing in the high-ceilinged room. Her heart raced in her chest, a frantic drumbeat that seemed impossibly loud. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated a scene she could never have imagined. James, her James, was there, his tailored suit impeccably sharp, yet his expression utterly different from the warmth she expected, locked in an intimate embrace with a woman she had never seen before. The other woman's laughter, soft and knowing, pierced Emily's chest like a blade. Her mind froze. For a moment, all she could see was the betrayal, the undeniable closeness, the casual way they held each other as if she did not exist. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Emily's fingers clutched the basket she had brought, but the ribbon cut into her palms unnoticed. Her vision blurred, the room spinning with the weight of what she had just discovered. She opened her mouth to speak, to demand, to scream, but no sound came out. Disbelief rooted her to the spot, and a wave of heartbreak crashed over her. Memories of their life together, the laughter, the dreams, the promises, flashed in her mind like a cruel slideshow. Her chest tightened, tears welling in her eyes, blurring the scene into smudged colors and muted shapes. She felt both shock and fury bubbling inside her, each emotion vying for dominance, each one stabbing her heart in a different way. The mistress noticed her almost immediately. Her eyes, dark and calculating, flicked toward Emily with a smug smile, almost as if she had been expecting her. There was no apology, no shame, only an unsettling confidence that made Emily's stomach churn. She seemed to savor the moment, adding insult to injury by casually adjusting her hair and leaning closer to James. Every gesture, every glance, screamed audacity and cruelty. Emily's body trembled as rage and humiliation warred within her, making her chest ache and her hands shake. The room's air felt heavy, charged with the electricity of betrayal. The soft hum of the city outside became distant, insignificant compared to the storm brewing within her. James finally noticed her, his eyes widening in surprise, but instead of remorse, there was hesitation, a flicker of panic that made her see the man she thought she knew in a new, horrifying light. His mouth opened to speak, but no words could justify what had just happened. Emily could feel the betrayal like a physical blow, her knees weakening under the weight of shock and despair. Her vision darkened around the edges as a wave of dizziness overtook her. She staggered, clutching at the desk, the basket of carefully prepared gifts slipping to the floor with a soft thud. The flowers tumbled, scattering petals across the polished marble, a cruel mockery of the love and effort she had poured into her surprise. Her body finally succumbed to the overwhelming emotions and the strain of pregnancy. Emily collapsed onto the cold office floor, the world tilting dangerously. Her chest heaved as sobs racked her body, tears streaming freely now, burning her cheeks. The metallic scent of the office's polished surfaces mixed with the faint aroma of her own perfume, creating a dizzying sensory cocktail that heightened her disorientation. James's voice trembled, a feeble attempt to reach her, but she could barely hear it, each syllable muted by the roaring pain inside her. The mistress's smirk widened, watching with a perverse satisfaction as Emily writhed in shock and anguish. The silence of the office, punctuated only by Emily's quiet sobs and the distant city sounds, seemed to mock her suffering. Emily's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just witnessed. How could James, the man she had loved and trusted completely, betray her like this? The weight of the realization pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe, while the betrayal she felt threatened to shatter her entirely. Every corner of the room, Every object she had once associated with comfort and love now seemed tainted, each shadow and reflection echoing the devastation of her discovery. In that moment of vulnerability, lying on the cold marble floor, Emily felt as though her world had crumbled into irreparable fragments. The basket, the flowers, her dreams, and her trust, all lay scattered around her, mingling with the tears she could no longer hold back. And as she trembled, gasping for breath, the reality of her pregnancy and the weight of the life growing inside her made the betrayal feel even more suffocating. A cruel reminder that nothing, not even love, was guaranteed, and that the life she thought perfect was now irrevocably shattered. The office erupted into controlled chaos the moment Emily collapsed. Security personnel rushed forward, their polished shoes echoing against the marble floor, while assistants and colleagues froze, unsure whether to intervene or stay back. The basket of gifts lay forgotten, its contents scattered across the floor, petals crushed beneath hurried footsteps. Whispers rippled through the room like a tide of disbelief, punctuated by the occasional sharp gasp. Phones appeared, dialing emergency numbers, while some tried to comfort Emily, though their words were clumsy against the overwhelming tension of the moment. Her breathing was shallow, erratic, each sob punctuated by a tiny gasp that set everyone's nerves on edge. The soft hum of the city outside was no longer background, it became a stark contrast to the high-pitched panic and urgency inside the office, amplifying the surreal nature of the scene. James stood frozen, one hand gripping the edge of his desk, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Shock rippled across his features first, the realization of what had just occurred crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Then came guilt, flickering in his eyes like a shadow, followed almost immediately by a brief, sharp spark of anger, an instinctive reaction to the exposure of his infidelity in such a public and dramatic way. His voice, usually confident and commanding, trembled as he tried to speak, to explain, to control the narrative, but each word faltered, tripping over the raw intensity of the moment. James's mind raced, attempting to calculate damage control even as he watched the woman he claimed to love struggle on the cold floor, vulnerable and broken. The receptionist, her fingers shaking as she held the phone, quickly dialed Emily's father, her voice tight and hurried. The sound of the ringing line seemed impossibly loud in James's ears. Moments later, the call was answered. "Dad, something's happened," Emily's weak voice broke through the line. I don't know. Please, you need to come." The line went silent for a second, and then her father, Michael Whittaker, a tall man with an imposing presence and an unwavering sense of justice, hung up with a snap, his mind already racing. His eyes narrowed, fists clenching involuntarily, as a storm of emotions surged inside him, rage, fear, and a protective instinct so sharp it felt like it could slice through steel. Every memory of his daughter, every bedtime story, every laugh they had shared, collided with the image that had just been painted in his mind. He could feel his blood boiling, and a determination settled in his chest. Whoever had done this, whoever had hurt Emily, would face consequences. By the time Michael arrived at the office, his car tires screeching against the asphalt, Emily was still lying on the floor, her breaths shallow and uneven, her face pale against the cool marble. Security personnel stepped aside, sensing the authority radiating from him. He dropped to his knees beside his daughter, his hands trembling slightly as he checked her pulse, reassured momentarily by its steadiness but alarmed by the pallor and weakness. He whispered words of comfort, his voice low and steady despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. As James attempted to step closer, Michael's glare stopped him in his tracks. The look in his eyes was not just anger, it was a promise of reckoning. The weight of fatherly protection pressed down like an immovable force, a silent declaration that he would do whatever it took to defend his daughter. Every second counted. Emily's health was fragile, the pregnancy adding another layer of urgency. Michael's mind raced with plans, strategies, and warnings, each one fueled by a potent combination of love and wrath. In that moment, the office was no longer a place of business, but a battleground where personal loyalty, betrayal, and the thirst for justice collided violently, setting the stage for consequences that no one could have anticipated. Michael Whittaker could not shake the image of his daughter lying on the cold marble floor, her body trembling, her breath shallow, her eyes brimming with pain and disbelief. He had arrived too late to prevent the betrayal, but he vowed, silently and fiercely, that he would uncover the full truth. The moment Emily had called him, a fire ignited within him, a mixture of rage, protectiveness, and the cold clarity of a man who knew he had to act decisively. He began with careful observation, refusing to confront James immediately. To do so without evidence would risk escalation, allow deceit to continue, and potentially endanger his daughter further. 4 days, Michael shadowed James's movements with meticulous care. He tracked him from his sleek office tower to high-end restaurants and private clubs, always keeping a safe distance, blending into the background like a shadow. The thrill of surveillance was tempered by tension, each step laced with anxiety. He noted the flicker of texts that James quickly deleted, the hurried glances over his shoulder, the subtle changes in routine that suggested someone else's presence. It was as though the truth hovered just beyond reach, teasing him with the edges of evidence that might be gone by the time he tried to capture it. One evening, in a quiet parking garage where James's luxury sedan was parked, Michael spotted her, the woman. The mistress emerged from the shadows with a confident stride, slipping into the car with a casual familiarity that made Michael's blood boil. He quickly snapped photos from a distance, the camera shutter a silent witness to the betrayal. Each click felt like a drumbeat of impending justice, each image a piece of the puzzle he would later lay out before Emily. He examined the photos carefully on his phone, heart hammering, mind racing between anger and a strange, calculating calm. He recognized the need to act methodically. The truth alone was power, and he could not afford mistakes born of unbridled rage. At home, late at night, Michael pieced together digital clues, deleted texts recovered through careful inspection, suspicious emails, and social media interactions. Every revelation brought a new wave of emotional turbulence. Protective instincts screamed for immediate confrontation, for punishment, for retribution. But his rational mind cautioned restraint. He needed undeniable proof, a clear narrative that would expose James's betrayal fully and without risk. Every photo, every message, every subtle observation had to fit into a cohesive story that would leave no room for manipulation or denial. Despite his strategic focus, Michael's emotions threatened to overwhelm him. He wrestled with an internal storm, the duality of a father's love and the thirst for justice tearing at his conscience. He thought of Emily, her trust, her innocence, her unwavering devotion, and felt the weight of betrayal as if it were his own body being pierced. And yet, he questioned himself constantly. Should he act out of rage, risking impulsive mistakes, or should he follow a calculated path that would ensure ultimate accountability? Moral justice demanded patience, evidence, and careful execution. Emotional revenge demanded immediate action, a display of wrath to soothe the fatherly wound. Every step of the investigation heightened the suspense, every glimpse of James with the mistress fueling Michael's fury while sharpening his resolve. He observed clandestine meetings, noted patterns in behavior, and recorded interactions, all without being seen. The world seemed suspended around him, as if reality itself conspired to keep him in a tense limbo of anticipation. Each night, he reviewed the day's findings, replaying scenarios in his mind, strategizing the inevitable confrontation. Through this painstaking process, Michael began to recognize a larger truth. Betrayal was not merely a personal offense, but a moral failing that needed to be addressed with clarity, precision, and integrity. His role was not only to protect his daughter, but to ensure that the wrongdoing was confronted in a way that could not be ignored or reversed. Emotional impulses warred with reason, anger with responsibility, but each step of careful observation and evidence gathering brought him closer to fulfilling both. The line between moral justice and personal revenge blurred at times, yet he remained committed to a path that honored his daughter's dignity and the need for accountability. By the end of the week, Michael had amassed enough proof to confront James decisively. Photographs, messages, and recordings that painted a complete picture of betrayal. The evidence, cold and undeniable, contrasted with the fire of his emotions. He felt a grim satisfaction, tempered by concern for Emily's fragile state and the intensity of the confrontation that lay ahead. The chessboard was set, the pieces aligned, and Michael knew that soon, justice and retribution would intersect in ways that none of them could have anticipated. Michael Whittaker arrived at the mistress's upscale apartment unannounced, his presence like a storm that had quietly but unmistakably descended. She opened the door, a slight smile playing on her lips, as if she had been expecting a polite visitor rather than the father of the woman she had just betrayed. "Mr. Whittaker," she said, her tone light, bordering on flirtatious. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Michael stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the apartment's warm, scented air doing nothing to soften the cold fury radiating from him. "Cut the act," he said sharply, his voice low and dangerous. "You know why I'm here. I know what you've been doing with my daughter's husband." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Explain yourself." The mistress's smile faltered, a flicker of unease crossing her carefully composed features. "Explain myself," she repeated, tilting her head as if trying to puzzle out a hidden meaning. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice carried a note of feigned innocence, but the tension in her posture betrayed her. Michael noticed it instantly, the slight trembling of her hands, the nervous glance toward her phone. "I've seen the photos, the messages," Michael said, his eyes narrowing, his presence dominating the room. "Every secret, every lie. You're going to tell me why you thought it was acceptable to ruin my daughter's life?" He stepped closer, the heat of anger in his chest forcing him to control his voice, turning it into a weapon rather than an outburst. "Do you even understand the damage you've caused?" The mistress's initial composure wavered. She laughed nervously, a hollow, forced sound. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't," she faltered, her arrogance slipping, replaced by a flash of fear. "It's not my fault if James—" Michael cut her off sharply. "Don't speak his name like it absolves you. Every choice you made brought him here, brought her to that floor, trembling, heartbroken. You think a few empty excuses will make this right?" His tone was ice-cold, each word deliberate, measured to inflict maximum accountability. "You don't understand, he told me," she started, but Michael silenced her with a single raised hand. "I understand, perfectly. You seduced, manipulated, and betrayed. And now, you're going to help me expose the truth fully, or you'll see just how far I'm willing to go." The room felt smaller, tighter, the air charged with tension. Every instinct, every thought, focused on the inevitable confrontation he was preparing. The mistress swallowed hard, realizing that his calm, strategic fury was far more dangerous than any momentary outburst of anger could ever be. Her arrogance faded into fear, her denial into reluctant acknowledgement. "What do you want from me?" she whispered finally, her voice trembling. "I want the truth." "Everything," Michael said, his eyes sharp, unyielding. "And I want your cooperation when it comes time to expose him publicly. Because make no mistake, James Rutherford will answer for this, and it won't just be words. Everyone will see who he really is." Her face paled, the realization of her complicity hitting her. She nodded reluctantly, her voice barely audible. I'll tell you everything." As Michael left the apartment, his mind raced with strategic calculations. He already had the evidence, but now, with her cooperation, he could construct a narrative so airtight that James's lies and manipulations would crumble publicly. Every image, every message, every recording could be deployed to reveal the betrayal, not just to Emily but to the world that had admired James. Michael's heart remained heavy with anger and protection, but his mind was cold and methodical, plotting the inevitable moment when justice would be served in full measure. He would expose James in a way that left no room for denial, no room for excuses, ensuring that the betrayal would never again touch his daughter or anyone she loved. The stage was set, the players in position, and Michael knew that the confrontation he had begun with one small, tense meeting was only the first act in a reckoning that would be as public as it was inevitable. James Rutherford paced the length of his sleek office, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. His mind raced in every direction at once, a chaotic storm of panic and calculation. He had always believed he could control every situation, every narrative, every impression, but this catastrophe, was unlike anything he had faced. Emily's collapse, the evidence Michael now possessed, and the creeping awareness that his carefully constructed life was unraveling left him feeling exposed in a way that money and charm could no longer shield him. His first instinct was to manipulate, to regain control through words and feigned innocence, but he knew he needed precision. Any misstep, any hint of guilt, and the carefully curated image he had built for years would crumble irreparably. When Michael arrived, the tension in the office became almost physical. James straightened immediately, forcing a smile that failed to mask the anxiety clawing at his chest. "Michael," he said smoothly, extending a hand, "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. Emily called you in haste, and, well, you know how things can be blown out of proportion." Michael didn't take the hand. His glare was sharp, unwavering, a clear warning that words would not sway him. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, his voice low but deadly, echoing across the polished room. "Do you take me for a fool, James? I've seen everything. Photographs, messages, recordings, every detail. Your lies will not protect you." James's throat tightened as he fought to maintain composure. He considered denial, weaving excuses, fabricating innocent explanations for what Michael had seen. But the evidence was damning, and he knew any flimsy lie would crumble under scrutiny. Instead, he resorted to calculated charm, leaning forward slightly, his tone carefully measured. "Michael, Emily, this is complicated. I never wanted to hurt her, and I certainly didn't mean for you to get involved like this. You have to understand my position. It's not what it seems." Michael's expression hardened, his jaw tight. "Not what it seems," he echoed incredulously. "Do you take my daughter's life, her health, her trust, and reduce it to a matter of perception? Every move you made, every deceitful step, led to her collapse on the floor. And now you have the audacity to play innocent." James felt a flicker of panic. His mind spun, racing through potential escapes, damage control, and contingencies. The mistress's cooperation with Michael complicated things, making his usual manipulations ineffective. Every scenario he imagined ended with exposure, humiliation, and loss. The thought of his reputation crumbling, his empire questioned, and his personal life splintered made his stomach churn with dread. Yet, outwardly, he forced calm, each word crafted to sound conciliatory while buying him time to strategize. Meanwhile, Emily lay on the sofa nearby, wrapped in a soft blanket, her breathing still uneven but steadily improving. She watched silently, her hands folded in her lap, powerless yet alert. Michael's calculated fury and strategic focus became painfully clear to her, and she began to understand that her father's plan was far more meticulous and deliberate than she had imagined. Every exchange, every verbal jab, every carefully measured pause was part of a larger strategy she could only glimpse. The verbal duel escalated. Michael's words were sharp, cutting through James's defenses like a blade, while James countered with carefully placed rationalizations, half-truths, and deflections. Threats, subtle and veiled, mixed with overt challenges, creating a tense battlefield of wills and intellect. Every word, every glance, every inflection carried weight. The air between them seemed to vibrate with emotion, charged with the intensity of fatherly protection clashing against desperate self-preservation. By the end of the confrontation, James realized the depth of the trap he was in. He could no longer maneuver freely. Every lie, every hesitation would be exposed. Emily watched quietly, absorbing the dynamic, her awareness sharpening with each moment. Her father's plan was unfolding exactly as he intended, a relentless march toward justice that left James cornered, vulnerable, and forced to confront the consequences of his actions in full. Michael Whittaker sat alone in the dimly lit study of his home, the weight of the past few days pressing heavily on his shoulders. The images of Emily lying on the cold office floor, her face pale and tear-streaked, haunted him relentlessly. He knew that passive observation and quiet anger were no longer sufficient. If he truly wanted to protect his daughter, he would have to act decisively, strategically, and ruthlessly. The man who had betrayed her could not simply be confronted in private. The consequences of his actions had to be made undeniable, visible, and permanent. Michael ran his hands over the polished oak desk, thinking through every possible avenue of retaliation, weighing each step with a father's precision and a strategist's mind. First, he considered exposure through social channels. James's life was public, his reputation carefully curated among high society, business networks, and the media. A scandal, presented with irrefutable proof, photographs, messages, recorded conversations, could shatter the illusion of perfection he had built. Michael envisioned a careful release, ensuring that James's betrayal would not merely humiliate him but serve as a cautionary tale for anyone who might exploit or deceive in the same way. The thought of the once untouchable millionaire's empire wobbling under the weight of truth gave Michael a grim sense of satisfaction. Legal repercussions were another avenue. Contracts, financial entanglements, and the careful documentation of James's misdeeds could be leveraged to ensure that he faced consequences beyond public shame. Michael considered hiring attorneys to investigate financial inconsistencies, binding agreements, and any unethical dealings that could be exposed alongside the personal betrayal. Every option, he realized, was a potential strike against a man who had believed himself untouchable. The strategy was meticulous, balancing morality and accountability while leaving no room for error. As he planned, Michael mentally prepared for the emotional fallout. Confronting James, exposing him publicly, and navigating the inevitable scandal would not be easy. There would be resistance, manipulations, perhaps even threats. But Michael steeled himself with one unshakable truth. He acted for Emily, to restore her dignity, to protect her from further harm, and to ensure that justice, personal, social, and moral, was unequivocally served. Every calculated decision was infused with a father's love and a protective instinct sharpened by righteous anger. Meanwhile, Emily's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. The initial shock and trauma had left her physically fragile, but with each passing day, she regained strength. Her breathing became more even, her color returned, and she began to engage with the world around her with cautious hope. Emotionally, she was still fragile, but beneath the sorrow and betrayal, a spark of resilience started to emerge. She observed her father's calculated determination, feeling a mixture of awe, gratitude, and renewed trust. Michael's unwavering commitment to defending her reminded her that she was not alone, that the man who had shattered her trust would face consequences designed not just to punish but to protect. As Michael finalized the contours of his plan, a quiet resolve settled over him. Every social, legal, and financial step was mapped out with precision. He would strike decisively, ensuring that James would be forced to reckon with his actions fully and publicly. At the same time, he watched over his daughter's recovery, balancing strategic ruthlessness with compassionate care, knowing that both paths, retaliation and protection, were intertwined in a single unyielding purpose: safeguarding Emily's future and restoring her peace. The day of reckoning arrived with a tense, almost cinematic precision. Michael Whittaker had orchestrated every detail with meticulous care, ensuring that the moment of exposure would leave no room for denial, excuse, or manipulation. Emily stood nearby, wrapped in a soft shawl, her heart pounding as she watched her father move with calm authority. Though still recovering physically, her emotional strength had begun to return, bolstered by the knowledge that the man who had betrayed her was about to face public accountability. James Rutherford arrived at the charity gala, a high-profile event where the city's elite mingled under glittering chandeliers and crystal chandeliers. He was confident, too confident, believing that appearances alone could shield him. His tailored suit clung perfectly, his hair immaculately styled, but beneath the polish lay a gnawing unease, a premonition that the carefully constructed world he had built might be on the brink of collapse. He exchanged pleasantries with colleagues, his charm a mask he wore with practiced ease, yet he could feel a subtle tension in the air, a barely perceptible watchfulness that made his pulse quicken. Then Michael stepped forward. Calm, commanding, and unyielding, he entered the grand hall with a kind of authority that silenced the room without a word. The hum of conversation stilled as all eyes turned toward him. He held a sleek tablet in his hand, the screen glowing softly, displaying the undeniable evidence he had painstakingly gathered: photographs, messages, and recordings that left no room for ambiguity. The hush was deafening, broken only by the sharp intake of breath from those present. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, his voice steady but sharp, carrying over the stunned silence, "what you are about to see is a truth long hidden. It involves betrayal, deception, and the reckless disregard of one man's promises to the woman he claimed to love." He tapped the tablet, projecting images onto the screen behind him. Photographs of James with a mistress, messages revealing secret rendezvous, and snippets of conversations flooded the room. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, the social elite frozen in shock as the facade of James Rutherford began to crumble. The mistress, seated at the far end of the room, recoiled in disbelief as her role was revealed. Her carefully maintained composure shattered in real time, her smug smile dissolved into horror, panic, and desperate denial. She tried to interject, but the room was no longer hers to command. The audience, previously oblivious to the scandal, turned their collective gaze toward her, and the weight of judgment fell like a hammer. Every whispered excuse, every attempt to shift blame, only heightened the sense of accountability crushing both her and James. James's face drained of color, his confident poise replaced with a mask of panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but words failed him. Every defense had been preemptively dismantled by the evidence Michael presented. Friends, colleagues, and family members looked on with a mixture of shock, disappointment, and moral outrage. The social hierarchy James had relied upon crumbled in moments, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, and powerless. Emily watched silently, her chest tight with a mixture of emotions. Relief mingled with lingering pain, but beneath it all, a deep sense of justice settled in her heart. She saw her father standing resolutely, a pillar of strength and righteousness, ensuring that her dignity was restored and her betrayal acknowledged. Michael's eyes met hers for a brief moment, conveying both reassurance and the satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. Every detail, every calculated step, had culminated in this moment of public reckoning. As murmurs of astonishment and judgment rippled through the room, Michael allowed himself a quiet, controlled smile. Justice had been served, not through vengeance alone, but through precision, planning, and unwavering commitment to truth. He had protected his daughter, restored her honor, and dismantled the illusion of perfection that James had relied upon. The chaotic scene around them, gasping guests, whispered condemnations, and the mistress's dramatic reactions, was the tangible manifestation of accountability. For Michael, the satisfaction was profound, a combination of relief, pride, and vindication. The man who had tried to destroy his daughter's happiness had been laid bare before everyone, and Emily, at last, could begin reclaiming her life with the knowledge that she was shielded, supported, and fiercely defended. The days following the public revelation were quiet, almost surreal, as Emily began the slow process of emotional healing. The initial shock of betrayal had left her raw and fragile, but with each passing day, she found herself gradually reclaiming a sense of control over her own life. She spent long hours reflecting on the events, allowing herself to fully experience the pain while also seeking the lessons hidden within it. Journaling became her solace, each word a small step toward clarity and understanding. In the privacy of her home, she allowed herself to cry, scream, and mourn, not just for James's betrayal, but for the trust she had given freely, the illusions that had crumbled, and the life she thought she had. Gradually, she began to embrace forgiveness, not for James or the mistress, but for herself, as a way to release the lingering weight of hurt and reclaim her peace. Emily's bond with her father deepened during this time. Michael's unwavering presence, his strategic protection, and his unshakable moral compass provided a safety net in which she could recover. They spent long afternoons together, talking about her fears, her hopes, and the future she wanted to build. Michael never forced advice or solutions. Instead, he listened, supported, and empowered her, allowing her to feel both heard and validated. In those moments, the father-daughter relationship transcended its usual boundaries, becoming a partnership built on mutual respect, love, and a shared understanding of justice. Emily realized, perhaps for the first time, how profound a father's protective instincts could be, and how deeply they could impact a daughter's sense of worth and security. Meanwhile, James was left to grapple with the consequences of his arrogance and betrayal. The public exposure had stripped away his carefully constructed image, leaving him vulnerable to both social judgment and personal reflection. Alone in his office, he replayed every choice, every deceptive act, every secret moment that had led to this downfall. The weight of loss pressed upon him, not only the loss of his wife's trust but the loss of respect, status, and credibility among peers who once admired him. For the first time, James confronted the true cost of his actions. A life of comfort and privilege could never replace the emotional bonds he had destroyed. His reflections were painful but necessary, a humbling reckoning that forced him to recognize the depth of his own failings. As for the mistress, the repercussions were swift and merciless. Society, having witnessed the scandal unfold, ostracized her, severing connections that had once seemed secure. Her professional reputation suffered as colleagues and clients distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone who had participated in such a public betrayal. Personally, she faced the isolation of guilt, judgment, and the knowledge that her complicity had caused real harm to an innocent woman. The consequences were total, a reminder that deceit and manipulation, no matter how calculated, ultimately invite retribution. Through it all, Emily emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. The trauma of betrayal became a catalyst for empowerment, allowing her to define her life on her own terms. Supported by her father and guided by the clarity that comes from facing pain directly, she discovered that strength often arises from vulnerability, and that reclaiming one's dignity is the first step toward building a future filled with resilience, purpose, and hope.